Hey guys, welcome back to the official podcast of Development Unplugged. And today we're going to have a very important conversation about difficult people. Let's talk about difficult people. I think one of the biggest sources of energy leak, energy drainage, frustration that we face is people in our lives that we don't understand, that we clash with, that we just get frustrated with. And these frustrations often are very fair and they're very valid, but sometimes we're not looking at the big picture. Sometimes we don't have the context. Sometimes we don't have all the information we need to really understand what's going on. And in this episode, we're going to talk about many different things to help kind of deal with difficult people. And actually, sometimes we can even turn those difficult people into our allies. Sometimes we can change their entire demeanor because, I mean, let's face it, most people who are difficult, who are forceful, who are insistent, who are bullies or who are rude are insecure people, are people who maybe in their home have a lot of problems, maybe are experiencing or have experienced a lot of abuse. Maybe they're people who feel that their voice isn't heard or valued, so they become more insistent and more repetitive. And these are things that when we identify, why is this person difficult? Oh, this person is difficult because this person is insecure. This person is difficult because this person has burned out and really has no energy. This person is difficult because he doesn't have enough context to understand the situation, and he's speaking based on his own context or experiences, and many times traumas from the past. And how can we contextualize things? How can we uplift people, work on their insecurities, regenerate people, regenerate ourselves also to be more resilient, more patient, more empathetic, more understanding? And how can we really create proper dialogue and proper communication where we're not invalidating each other, where we're not forcing our points, and where we're really understanding like the situation for what it is, instead of filling the void and filling the blanks, because when we don't have enough information, when we don't have enough context, we are masters at filling the blanks.
Yeah.
So, let's talk difficult people.
One of the things that you really want to look at when you're dealing with difficult people is what are your long-term and short-term goals? And how does that person play into that? You know, if this is a person who most of the time is a great person who contributes to your life and they're going through a rough patch, you're going to deal with it differently than if it's someone who's chronically difficult and maybe doesn't play an important role in your life. There will be times when there are people that maybe you just don't need to spend that much time on them. Maybe you don't need to keep focusing your energy on them. Maybe you have an ex that's criticizing you on social media and you don't have friends in common. You don't really have anything in your life in common. And you're just staying invested because you care. You've cared about this person at some point, and you're sad that things didn't go well. In that kind of situation, putting distance might be the best solution. But if it's somebody that you work with, if it's a live-in family member, if it's somebody that you have more of a strong relationship with, whose life is more connected to yours, then you do want to start looking at, okay, what are our goals long-term and short-term? How does my life influence yours and vice versa, in order to start building an appropriate plan for the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's, in other words, what part of what you were saying was basically pick your battles.
Yeah.
Like, we have this reactive nature sometimes where we react and respond to every criticism, every difficult situation. We defend ourselves, well, depending on your culture and context and personality, but it's very, very common to see situations where, there's this minor little thing. Well, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to defend myself. And suddenly a battle or discussion or disagreement comes out of something really not important.
Yeah.
And exactly, we can lose track of the real mission. We can lose sight of what really matters. How many times in the office have you experienced, we have this goal, but we are bickering over small little details, right? Or in a relationship, like, how many times do you let the smallest little thing get out of hand, out of control? And these are things that we got to be very, very careful with. When we have more confidence, when we are more regenerated, when we have more energy, mental clarity, what happens? We're more resilient. We have more defenses. We have more stamina. We can put up with a few more things that are maybe a little frustrating without exploding in them and turning them into something way bigger than they actually are.
Yeah.
We have full control over how things affect us. We don't have full control over what other people do. We can influence them to be a better version of themselves, more regenerated, more in a happier state. But we cannot make them do things that they don't want to. But we can change how we are affected.
Yeah.
We can change, like, we can decide, oh, this little annoying thing is going to affect me like this, like a little, like they're just pressing a little button. Or it can feel like, oh, I've just gotten destroyed, demolished, like, oh, I'm knocking out, I got knocked out, I'm tapping out, I give up. Like, we can really decide which of those two it is.
No, and one thing we have to look at, when something affects us very strongly, we have to look at what's behind our reaction. Because if we're caught up in little things as if they're really big issues, chances are we feel that it's a symptom of something bigger, or it's triggering a situation that's bigger for us. So if we look at it and go, oh, wait, it's because I have this insecurity, or oh, wait, I have this belief that there's not enough resources in the world, so I have to fight for everything that I can fight for. If you identify the root issue, it's easier to deal with than if you're just trying to win that fight that probably isn't even the real issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that go into dealing with difficult people. And yes, we have to be objective. We have to define what are our goals, what do I want to achieve. We have to investigate and get enough context to understand why the other person is acting or saying or doing what they're doing. And then we also have to investigate and understand, why is what this person is doing or saying affecting me so much? Because exactly, it might be, oh, that reminds me of this person or this ex, or that is something that I've seen someone else experience and I don't want to experience that myself. So before it gets out of hand, I'm gonna... And many times we don't treat the situation as a unique situation. Yeah. We really connect dots that sometimes we shouldn't. Yeah. Sometimes we should, but even then we should be like, okay, what's similar and what's different in this situation? Because every single situation is unique. Yeah. And every single situation deserves to be contextualized, to be investigated, to be understood, to be communicated, because if not, you're going to give up on people prematurely because you're going to think, oh, that person is abusive. And maybe they're not abusive. Maybe they're just drained, insecure, and miscommunicate. But it reminds you of one person who really is. Yeah. Just because two people do some things the same doesn't mean that they do everything the same. Yeah. Doesn't mean that they're the same person. So treat people as individuals. I think, I mean, in developed development, we talk about that so much. No one size fits all. Treat people as individuals. Respect people's differences. Understand the differences. Don't blanket slate judge anyone. Because also, like, even things that we find really frustrating that go against our values. Let's talk diversity for a second. There's so many ways of living life. There's so many belief systems, so many religions, so many, so many ways to live life. And we are in a beautiful era where there's so much self-exploration and there's so much communication and education about all these differences. And these differences can cause a lot of frustration. But with any type of difference in anything, when we're talking about people, in developed development, we always talk about differences can be a source of growth. We can learn from each other. We can support each other. We can help each other. But differences without curiosity to understand, differences without mutual respect, mutual gratitude and appreciation, can lead to conflicts and sad conflicts where people get invalidated. And this is where we cannot play zero-sum games. We cannot have this mentality, for me to win, you have to lose. For my opinion to be valid, your opinion has to be invalid. Like, we can have different opinions. And yes, if we take the time to understand people's contexts, all of a sudden we might find out, oh, we're more on the same page than we realized. We just had different, like we lived in different cities or we went to different schools, or our parents had different ways of dealing with situations. Okay, we have different contexts, but how do we bridge those gaps? Yeah. And I think there's great opportunity to bridge a lot of gaps, because sometimes those gaps, we choose not to try to bridge them. And when you take the time, and again, you have to pick your battles. You have to, I mean, it's not that you want to go around like justifying your actions. That's a big problem, that some people go around life justifying their actions or insisting that their way is the right way. No, just have curiosity, have an open mind, try to understand others, take time to share your context. Don't assume that other people know it, because they don't. And really take the time to understand each other. Yeah. I mean, that's an essential step that many people skip.
Yeah, I think what you say about curiosity is a big point, because it's so easy to get caught up in our own experience of life that we lose sight of how other people live. Yeah. And if we have that curiosity, we start seeing, oh, look, the world is huge. Yeah. There's room for a lot of different ways of doing things, a lot of different types of people. Maybe not everyone is going to be your best friend. Maybe not everybody's going to be the person that's most involved in your life. But there is room for a lot of diversity. Yep. There is room for different ideas. Yep. And if we have curiosity about them, of, hey, that's interesting, I want to learn, then our experience, their experience, everyone's experience is going to be very different.
Yep. And also, we have to also be aware that we cannot force other people to be curious about our reality, because maybe they don't have interest or any invested interest in understanding us. But if the other person or the other people are important, and you're collaborating with them, you're living with them, you're working with them, and you're clashing a lot over the differences, then what we sometimes talk about in developed development is, okay, don't force your context on others, because yes, if you are constantly forcing your context on others, that's not going to create dialogue nor curiosity. However, if you communicate the value of your context, but with vocabulary, with intensity, with examples that the other person can appreciate and value, all of a sudden things change. But yes, if we can be proud people, we can hold so much onto, this is our identity, these are our values, these are our experiences, this is my traumas, this is my whatever it is. And you need to hear it, you need to understand it, you need to appreciate it. And if we go too much in that narrative, the dialogue stops. But yes, if you go into, okay, I understand, I have my context, you have your context. I understand if I share my context with my vocabulary, you're not going to understand or appreciate or value it. However, let me explain my context with metaphors and examples from your life that you might understand. I'll give you a good example. Here at the office, we have different people who have different, very, very different contexts, different personalities, different challenges. And for example, we have a person who's ADHD. We have a couple of people who have anxiety. And we have some people who have suffered from depression and things like that, right? And sometimes when we have to explain what one person is going through, we have to explain it with examples that the other person can understand. Yeah. So like, for example, if a person with ADHD doesn't understand anxiety, we can be like, okay, understand how we all don't understand your ADHD. This is the same thing. Like, this is foreign. Your ADHD is foreign to us. Now with that, you find maybe this anxiety foreign to you, is like, understand, here's an example that you live every day. Yeah. This is basically what this person is experiencing in a different way, that they're having this situation with anxiety, and you might not understand it because your brain isn't wired that way. And then it's, okay, so sometimes it's, because if you go attack the other person or invalidate the other person, it's not good. Yeah. But if you just go, listen, there is, like, you have had an experience that's similar to the experience that I felt. Even though it's totally different, there's common ground.
Yeah.
And finding common ground is always key to really creating more empathy, more curiosity. Oh, yes, there's common ground here. How can we understand each other better?
Yeah. No, it's similar to what we do when we talk about the different personalities or the different elements that make up our personalities, because it can be so easy to not understand each other's motivations, each other's drives, based on what our own drives are. But when we sort of lay it out as, look, this person is motivated by this for this reason, it gives them this feeling that they enjoy, and when they don't have this, they feel like this because of this. When we explain it that way, it's so much easier for other elements to look at and go, oh, okay, that's similar to how I feel this and need this. When you just look at it at surface, it's like, hey, this is important to me, and you're doing the exact opposite. But when you look at the motivations behind, when you start laying it out with a bit more detail of, look, this is why, then we start being able to understand each other. And the same thing can be applied to other types of differences. It's once we understand, oh, okay, these are the motivations, these are the drives, these are the ways in which this is functioning, then it's much easier to understand than when you just look at the surface.
Yeah, no, I sorry, I'm reading some questions and comments here. When dealing with a difficult person, you generally don't have a lot of time to sit back and analyze things in the moment. So how do you ask these questions and take time to ponder the context and the goals in the moment? So it's a very good question. It's a very good question. And something that we have to look at is, okay, when is the right moment to ask these questions? Because if a person is being difficult, sometimes they're being difficult because in that moment they're feeling very insecure, or they're feeling very drained, and they're being more forceful or more one-track mind than usual. So in that moment, we might not be able to extract the information that we need from them. And if we can take certain actions to regenerate the other person, to make the other person feel less attacked, less devalued, less invalidated, more heard, then they're going to be less difficult, and then it's going to be easier to have a dialogue. So sometimes it's just take some steps to change the intensity of the situation so that a dialogue can form. Sometimes it's, okay, sure, time, it can be a challenge, but you don't have to fix everything in that one moment. Because, yes, patience is key. When we're trying to deal with difficult people, we need patience. We need patience because it takes time to understand each other, to share each other's context, to find that middle ground. It takes time. But the more we focus on regenerating each other, validating each other, uplifting each other, and defining a mutual goal that we all are going in the same direction, the easier it is to solve. If everyone has very different missions, it's hard. If everyone is drained, it's hard. If everyone is insecure, it's hard. But if you eliminate insecurities, if you recharge people to the point where they have more mental clarity, more energy, more patience, more empathy, if you change the intensity of the situation from being where everyone is super tense and very upset with each other to being able to breathe and relax and just kind of have a chill conversation, it can be very beautiful. I've seen people with very different contexts feel like, oh, I'm being heard, I'm being valued. Okay. And yes, sometimes it starts by, okay, not asking all these questions and interrogating, but just starting with a compliment. I have been able to disarm intense people with compliments on so many occasions. And yes, sometimes difficult people are so insecure that it's hard for them to see the compliment and receive the compliment. And that's where you have to really spell it out. Look, you just saved me this amount of time. You just saved me this amount of money. Look, this thing you just did, no one else on the team can do. Look, this thing is so powerful, so valuable. And really point it out and spell it out to them. And that can help a lot. But there's so many things. Obviously, it depends on the situation at hand. Also, there are many different types of difficult people. But I will say, most bullies are bullies because they were bullied at home or have conflicts at home and fighting in the home and violence in the home. When someone feels bad they often will try to make other people feel bad to make themselves feel better.
Yeah,
it's sadly a strong instinct.
No, and people have the social skills that they've learned.
Yeah.
People have the social skills that they've been shown, that they've grown up with. So there was something else that I wanted to point out, and now I lost my point. I lost
That
my
at the
train of
home, bullies have been bullied. People have had kind of maybe traumas that make them not trust people.
Yeah, one thing that we also have to look at is when we're about to go for the attack in an argument. An easy way to change the dynamic is to simply ask a question. It might still be related to what you were going to say as an attack, but it's very easy to say, oh, you don't understand because of blah, blah, blah. Okay, ask the question. Do you understand? Does this experience affect you? Are you thinking this thing that I'm thinking you're thinking? Just being able to confirm and ask is an opportunity for them to give you more context.
Yeah, and also when you pick your words, if you invalidate the others with your word choice, they get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if your answer to someone's context or someone sharing their thoughts is no, that's not possible, that's wrong, this doesn't work. Like if it goes straight to criticism, the other person gets defensive. But if you go, oh, that's great, but have you taken into account this thing? Or that's great, but have you thought about this? And what about this? What are we going to do about this? But really, exactly, it's like, yes, and it's yes, but you don't say but. You say, and have you considered? Because if you say and instead of but, it's not a rejection of the idea. So, yes, and we also have to take into account this. Have you thought about this? What about this? Really just making it seem like, okay, I'm taking your idea, I'm running with it enough to analyze the opportunities to improve the idea and to implement the idea, but I'm not just scratching it out right away. Yeah. Because if you come and scratch out the other person's idea right away, they feel unvalued, they feel that their ideas aren't appreciated, and they even get afraid of speaking up and sharing their context. And that's also something we have to be aware of. Do we make people afraid of sharing their context? Do we shut people up, Steve, behind the scenes? Yep. Do we make people afraid of sharing their context? Because it can happen to the best of us. And I'm sure all of us have done it in some moments, some more than others. But it's okay to find flaws in people's ideas. It's okay to find ways of improving things. But just be aware that the way you share that can not only change that one specific situation, but it can also prevent dialogue in the future. Because if other people conclude, oh, they cannot come up to you and talk to you, they cannot come up and share an idea with you without you just instantly scrapping it, then things are not going to flow. And I've had challenges with that here at the office, balancing quality control and empowering people, right? So I've gone on both extremes. I've empowered people so blindly that suddenly things get done and it's like, what's going on here? And then I have micromanaged to a degree where it's like, okay, no one feels that they can do things by themselves. And now I'm working on finding that balance, because I've had people feel like their ideas and their work isn't valued and isn't appreciated because I might critique it too much. And then I've had people who have have had so much freedom, and then maybe at the very end, once it's done, I come in and it's like, okay, what about this, and this? And really the ideal situation is constant communication, but we'll focus on the common goal, solving problems, but not scrapping things right away. Because most ideas are actually good, they're just underdeveloped. And that's something that we have to understand. There's a difference between a totally invalid idea and an underdeveloped idea. And it's very easy for us to go, that is a totally bad idea. But in most cases, when you're innovating, you don't have the data, you have to do something new, you have to do something different, and you gotta constantly be innovating, whether it's your career, your business, or whatever. Innovation is key. But to innovate, you gotta take risks. But to take risks, you have to be willing to experiment with uncharted territory. And something you got to be aware of is when you're doing that, don't be too, like, don't hold on too much to your context and your goals and your thoughts to the degree that it blinds your possibilities. Because how many businesses have failed because they stopped innovating, and then another company comes out of left field with some crazy idea for that moment, might seem ahead of its time, but they develop it, and all of a sudden the company that was on the throne stops having power.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen that time and time again in so many industries. So the reason why I say this is because it's directly linked to dealing with difficult people. And when we're talking about dealing with difficult people, I also challenge you to ask yourself, are you a difficult person? Because the reality is most people are difficult people in the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
You know, not always, not in every moment, but we've all been difficult. We've all had moments where we're drained, insecure, where we have a one-track mind, and where we invalidate others and we shut down people. Even if we have good intentions, even if we think, oh, we're not discriminatory, oh, we're not this, we're not that. Maybe not at a conscious level, but how many times have you had microaggressions or micro rejections, or like just kind of ignored or invalidated people without even trying to, right? And I'm sure many of you are like, okay, yep, I've done that, but how do I deal with that? Well, this is where you have to ask yourself, are you going through life in a drained state? Are you letting your previous traumas and insecurities stop you from really having healthy conversations? And if so, are you willing to look at that critically and start taking steps to trusting again, to taking risks again, to being willing to fail again? Because also a lot of difficult people are difficult because they try to control everything, because they probably lost everything at some point. They probably were rejected terribly at some point. They probably have some fear of, I don't want to go through that again. And then they force things, and then they're not willing to take the risks or take that ego blow that might be needed to go through a process. Like, for example, we're entrepreneurs here. And one thing that surprises me sometimes is with entrepreneurship, there are ups and downs. There are moments, there are amazing highs, and there are very low lows, and there's a lot in between. But I've been surprised sometimes by how people who get out of a difficult situation, get out of extreme poverty, get out of bad relationships, get out of something that they don't want to go back to, how their fear of not experiencing that again can make them so forcefully intense to the degree that they aren't willing to trust again. They're not willing to take a risk again. They're not willing to live a more modest lifestyle, to maybe have the resources to level up, right? And it's like, it surprises me. And that's why in development we always talk about give more power to your goals than your fears.
Yeah, no, that's something that we really have to look at, because yes, when we've been in a difficult situation, of course we don't want to go back to that. I know for me, there was a period right after I was coming out of a quite deep depression where any sad or difficult emotion was really difficult for me to handle, because it reminded me of where I was a month, 2 or 3 ago, and I didn't want to go back there. So I was controlling everything with so much effort and so much intensity of, I have to be happy all the time, because if I'm not, I might get back into that. And so, yes, that's probably going to be part of the process, but you don't want to get stuck in that part of the process. You want to kind of walk yourself through it. Okay, in a life that is happy and without depression, there's still going to be sad moments. There's still going to be angry moments. There's still going to be moments that aren't perfect. And you have to kind of walk yourself through it of, okay, how long have I been upset? 10 minutes? That's fine. How long have I been upset? 1 day? That's fine. How long have I been upset? 2 days, 3 days? Okay, what can I do to change the situation? So you're being proactive about not getting back to where you were before, but you're also not in panic mode and constant fear of getting back to where you were before.
No, and a lot of people create what they're afraid of. Because, for example, if you're, let's say, an entrepreneur, and you're working towards a certain goal, sometimes to maximize resources, you gotta live certain modest lifestyle.
Yeah.
Steve is saying you're the king of modest lifestyle. I'm not saying I'm the best at modest lifestyles, but in this process of entrepreneuring, I have been at extreme poverty at the point of not being able to afford a taco on the streets in Mexico.
Yeah.
I've gone through it all. I've had extreme lows and extreme highs, and that's something that I'm very open and transparent about. Yes, right now, obviously, it's not as modest as it was a few years ago, but something that I've noticed, and the point is difficult people, is when people are so afraid of taking step backwards, they try to force forward, when sometimes you got to take a few steps backwards to catapult forward.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have really sometimes been good at and sometimes really been bad at, and I admit that. But it's something that when you're willing to take the risks, and you're willing to be like, I'm willing to lose everything to make this happen, and I'm willing to go back to live on the streets to make this happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have that mentality, then you're going to take the action that's required in the moment.
Yeah.
You're not going to force the action that most pats the back of your ego.
Yeah.
And difficult people sometimes are very forceful and insistent because they are so afraid of taking steps backwards. But remember, you can catapult forward by taking some very strategic steps backwards to really catapult forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, if you know even the most basic parts of car racing, you know that once in a while the car has to go off to the side, get some tire changes and things like that. And if you're so afraid of being slowed down that you're not willing to take those few seconds, right now they're getting really fast at it, so it's a few seconds, but if you're not willing to take that moment, you burn out your tires, you lose control, and you lose the whole race, maybe more. So yes, in any process towards any goal that you're going, there are going to be the less perfect moments. It's not a straight line. And we see these little memes online with like the road to success, what I think it's going to look like and what it's actually like. And we make fun of it, but it's true. We have to be aware of it in the moment that it's happening. Okay, yes, right now I'm taking 2 steps back, but it's 2 steps. I haven't taken 8 steps back. And if I haven't taken 20 steps back. And in the bigger picture, it's probably not that many steps, even if it's 20.
And if you take 20 steps backwards, it can be, okay, these 20 steps backwards free up all these resources, free up all these opportunities that will help me get 40 or 50 steps forward, right? So we have to be very careful not to force things, because exactly in a racetrack, if you don't take time to do your pit stops, I mean, your tires will explode and your car will break down, and then it's like, okay, you lose, period.
Yeah, and it's the same when you don't take time to regenerate and take care of yourself. And proactive regeneration, if I think we've mentioned it in the podcast, but if we haven't, part of proactive regeneration is working on your insecurities, is working on your belief systems and whether they're working for you or not. It is looking at these things, because if you're, let's say you're an electric person and partying regenerates you. If you're partying every night, but you're not looking at your insecurities, you're not looking at what situations in your life are draining you and how you can proactively change those, no amount of parties is going to get you to where you need to go. If you're looking at those things too, if you're working on your insecurities, if you're advancing in your ideas about life, if you're learning how to understand, okay, this tough moment doesn't define me, then one party can give you a lot of energy.
No, and we also have to be aware, like, why are we being difficult? Or why is the other person being difficult? Is it's this insecurity of not going back to where they've been, or it's this fear of failing in a way they haven't failed before? Because there's a bit of a difference between being afraid of having an experience they've already had and having an experience that's unknown. So if it's an experience that's unknown, we can take steps to reduce the risks. Oh, there's this information that might help alleviate some stress or some anxiety. But
what about lack of understanding? Sometimes people get difficult.
So Steve is asking behind the scenes, what about lack of understanding? What did you say after that?
Sometimes people become difficult when they don't understand something.
So this is a very, 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 very important question. What do you do when you don't understand something and you become difficult as a result of not understanding something? Or when you're trying to understand something and the other person is being difficult and they're not willing to give you the information you need to understand the situation. Lack of understanding and lack of context deteriorates conversations, collaborations, relationships, and the less we understand the situation, the easier it is to judge, criticize, reject, give up, feel powerless. Because exactly, if we don't understand, we don't have power, we don't have tools, we don't have even a starting point.
Yeah.
And we need to find that. And yes, it is a process of active curiosity and active communication both ways.
Yeah.
And it is okay, I need to understand these things, but I also need to share these things. And the process in which one does that can really change how easy it is to get the information. And this is what we were talking about earlier. If you make the other person get defensive by you don't understand a situation and you go, no, but it doesn't make sense, I don't understand it. The more you, even though that's how you feel, if that's what you communicate, the other person is going to feel invalidated. So if you want the other person to communicate what they actually are feeling, it's, okay, I kind of understand, but I'm not quite getting the big picture. So can you answer a few questions so I get the finer details? Like, yes, I basically communicating, yes, I'm trying here to understand. I'm not just outright giving up, but I need some help.
Yeah.
Asking for help is powerful. People love helping. People love feeling like
They're useful.
They love feeling like someone cares and wants to listen. But it's very, very easy to make someone feel like they aren't useful or they aren't cared about and that they're invalidated and just their entire context is wrong.
Yeah. No, and also sometimes maybe with a specific individual you won't get the information that you need, but there might be other sources of that information.
Yes.
There might be other people with similar experiences and similar contexts that you can reach out to. I mean, right now with social media, it's so easy to learn about so many things. You YouTube anything and there's a vlogger that talks about their experiences with something. And even if they're not identical experiences, they might provide you with certain things that maybe the other person just thought it was so obvious that they didn't explain it to you. But this other person knows, okay, this is part of the story that people need to know. Yeah. So there's also a level of sort of proactive seeking out of information that you can do where if you know how you learn, if you learn with books, find books related to that, whether it's a novel that talks about a certain type of experience, whether it's psychology books, whether it's business books, whether it's anything. If you learn listening to people, go on YouTube, listen to people talk on their vlogs about things. There's so many ways in which we can access information that if you know a little bit about how you learn, you can probably find something.
And to make that process easier, if you define a common goal and you understanding this situation that is hard to understand and hard to learn, it's like, for example, me with math. There's some types of math that I just look at the numbers and I blank out. But there are some types of math that I'm actually quite good at because it's very relevant to my missions. So business math, I'm pretty okay at. Everything that related to taxes, percentages, commissions, like margins, all those sort of things, I understand very well because it's in line with my interest. It's in line with my goals. But yes, you try to make me understand cosine, sine, and tangent, and I go,
what?
Huh? Because it is not directly connected with my goals. So the first thing you have to do is define a goal and understand that taking the time to research, understand, even if it requires patience, taking that time is an investment in getting to where you want to be. If you do that, then you're going to be willing to take more time to investigate, to understand, and you won't get frustrated and impatient so fast.
Yeah, and if you're looking at relationships, if the long-term goal is having a positive relationship dynamic, whether it's a personal or professional one, then you might identify, okay, understanding this about this person is part of that goal of having this positive dynamic so we can be more productive or so that we can be more collaborative or so that we can have a better, happier relationship. Then that motivation can also drive you when it's tough, when you don't understand, when it's challenging. You have that motivation.
And yeah, and I want to add something too. You don't always have to do it alone either. Use support networks, use mediators. I mean, when you have people of different personalities, for example, if you have a person who's very extroverted, someone who's very introverted, maybe having an ambiverted person be the mediator might make a lot of sense. I am quite ambiverted, so I get to be a mediator a lot and explain to introverted people how extroverted people work and vice versa. So picking good mediators can also improve the conversation on the direction and focus of any difficult conversation, any difficult dynamic. And it's really something that we have to understand. Very few things in life do we have to do fully alone. We are social beings. Even introverts are social beings. Yes, they might have 1 or 2 people with whom they confide in instead of 5, 10, 20. But the reality is we all benefit from having people we can be ourselves with, we can express ourselves with, without fear of being rejected, without feeling of being dismissed. And if you have a difficult dynamic with someone where sadly in the past there has been very difficult experiences and it's hard to recover from, finding that person on the team or in your family that is kind of in between the two and can see both sides and can help take one person's words and put them in other words in a way that the other person understands, that is powerful too. And we have to also understand, it doesn't matter if we're 20, 50, 100 years old. Mediators have value. In politics, they're mediators. In business, they're mediators. And something that I've sometimes heard is, I'm 29 years old. I should not need to have a mediator to have a conversation with someone. That's valid. So Steve is saying that's valid, but one of the reasons why is because I'm throwing him under the bus without actually mentioning his name. But now let's talk. So recently we had a bit of a conflict here in the office, and Steve got very frustrated that we needed to mediate the situation, and he felt that the situation had to be dealt with mano a mano. He just said those words, direct one-on-one. And the reality is sometimes if that's what you choose to do, you can make the conflict grow instead of solving the problems. Because maybe you don't have enough context and insight to understand. And if you forcefully try to fix the situation in the moment, you will end up draining each other. In this case, me as the CEO, as the founder, as the whatever, the leader of this team, I had information and insight as to why every person was feeling what they were feeling and dealing with what they were dealing with to some degree. I didn't have a full panorama, so I also took some time and decided I'm not going to fix this in this moment. I'm going to take some time, wait for things to cool off. I'm going to talk with people individually. I'm going to try to understand what the situation is, what the dynamic is. Why did this spiral out of control? Okay. This one person had an experience that gave them a flashback of this other experience, which Steve would not have understood or known in that moment. And yes, in the moment, this other person was so drained and so insecure and feeling so bad that they didn't have the faith or the confidence to share things without maybe exploding or breaking down. So they needed to isolate themselves from the situation to take a breather. And it's perfectly fair to take a breather. It's perfectly fine to disconnect, regenerate, collect thoughts, and then come back to have a healthy conversation. That's what happened here on the team. However, some things were mismanaged a little bit, where the people who had to disconnect and breathe and collect their thoughts failed at communicating part of the process. And that led a lot of insecurities, and yes, that desire to fix the problem in the moment. But depending on your personality and your context, fixing it in the moment can be very, very hard, and it can be a big mistake. Many, many relationships really suffer greatly by having reactive, explosive situations by dealing with things in the moment instead of waiting.
However, in this case, not dealing with it in the moment caused 4 days of tension and lost productivity. So I argue that solving it in the moment, mano a mano, would have been a good approach.
Steve is sharing, in this particular instance, it took 3 or 4 days for people to collect their thoughts, for the conversations to be healthy, for things to get resolved. And that affected the productivity in the office. And from his point of view, it would have been better to solve it in the moment. And I don't disagree. And sometimes you can do that, and sometimes that's what's needed. My personality, being fiery, I want things fixed fast. But I also have experienced, by being too intense and forcing fixes in the moment, I have pushed people away. I have destroyed relationships. I have really messed up big time by doing that, because I grew up with that mentality. My mother and I were always more of the, we can have a disagreement, we can explode, and we can fix it fast. But for example, my sister, being more introverted, needs more time to collect thoughts, organize thoughts. So she could take multiple days or multiple weeks to collect thoughts and really restore certain communication. A middle point is the healthy point. Not, you don't want to force it, and you don't want to escape from the problem.
Yeah,
escapism is something we talk about in Develop Your Element. And yes, if you're escaping from your problems, it's a problem. In this particular instance, this event we're talking about, there was a borderline escapism for a few days, but there was still enough internal processes going on, enough dialogue that really was focused on what are our common goals, what are we trying to fix, why are we feeling this way, and it was dealt with maturely, yes, a few days later, but and yes, in a difficult moment, but I do really feel, based on what I've heard from the parties involved, how we tried to force it in a moment, probably there would have been a much bigger split up and a much bigger explosion.
Now, what I would add to that conversation, knowing that there were such different personalities involved, is that if you're the party that's going through that process, the one that needs that time, being able to say that, maybe not explain everything, but just say, look, some things are going on. This isn't on you. Yeah. But I have some personal things going on right now that I'm dealing with. Give me a day or two. Give me some time to reflect, and then I'll come back to this conversation with you. I think that could have helped bridge the gap between the differences in personality.
No, and I got messages like that from the parties involved. Those weren't maybe communicated as clearly to all the parties involved, but I did get messages like, I need some time right now to just collect my thoughts, to disconnect, and I'll be back on track as soon as possible. So that's something that we have seen happen, but that we also know can improve. And that's where I did say, for example, in this one event, it was very clear that there were some things that were mismanaged, but at the end of the day, we got to be careful not to force in the moment. And as I say, the best situation is neither force in the moment, take a breather, sometimes take a day. Yes, maybe 4 days was a little too much, but there are many things going on, and at least for me, there were other things that really took precedence in the moment. But yes, don't force things in the moment. Wait till all the parties are in a better mental state, and then have the difficult conversations. Because if you have the difficult conversation when people have peak insecurities, that is the recipe for disaster. For example, when this situation happened, this other individual was at peak insecurities. All of this person's insecurities came tumbling into their head, and they just compiled and they added up to the point where this person really in that moment would not have had a good conversation. And even if it had gotten solved, it would have been a zero-sum game. It would have been, I am submitting to you, I am gonna say everything is okay when everything is not okay. And we also have to be aware of false fixes. When we're dealing with difficult conversations, many times we do false fixes where it's like, oh yeah, everything is okay, and it's not. Or, oh yeah, I agree, I was wrong, and you don't really feel that that's the complete picture. And being submissive to a situation is different than actually having a dialogue about the situation. Now, we have another question. When do you draw a line and give up on a difficult person? That's a very, very good question. I've had to draw lines even with family members that I care for very much, but they're so difficult that every time I see them, I get drained, I get more insecure, I feel smaller, I feel invalidated, and anything I do or say isn't enough. In those cases, I have decided to do it. But basically, step one is start by trying to regenerate yourself and the other person. Step two, try to uplift yourself and uplift the other person and work on the insecurities. Step three, try to understand each individual context. Step four, try to share your context with examples that fit into the other person's context, with metaphors, with vocabulary, with intensity that the person can understand. If you take those steps, assuming that these are important, because as he mentioned earlier, you got to pick your battles, but assuming that this person is important, you take those steps, and then, despite taking all those steps, there's still no progress, that's when you got to ask yourself, okay, so I've taken these steps, things are not improving. So what percentage of the time are they draining me? Are they invalidating me? Are they making me feel small? And what percent of the time are they supporting me, collaborating with me, and helping me?
Yeah.
And then you have to decide for you what those percentages look like and what percentages you're willing to put up with.
Yeah.
I myself am a more tolerant person than other people because I have the earthly nature. I am very empathetic, and I've had a life and a lifestyle with so much living in different countries and cultures and societies that I've kind of seen so many walks of life that I've kind of become kind of more tolerant than other people. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be submissive to situations that are unhealthy. So what I've kind of decided is if the majority of the time they're regenerating me and they're helping me, then I'm willing to put up with a minority of the time being annoying, frustrating, invalidating, blah, 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 conflicts, all this stuff. I'm like Teflon. Things don't stick. I don't get offended almost ever. It's very, very hard to offend me. But I also am a practical person. If someone is being annoying and it's not being collaborative, it's a waste of my time. So from that perspective, it's like, okay, time management, more than 50% of the time contributes to me well. Okay, maybe in the beginning, I'll be willing to put up with 50% of annoying stuff. But if I don't see growth and I don't see that 50% of annoying time reduced to 40 and 30, then I might call it quits on that person. But every person has their own limits. I'm not here to tell you what your limit should be, but definitely ask yourself, is this person contributing or taking away more?
Yeah.
That's kind of the base point.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's nothing wrong with saying, I will only put up with someone if they contribute to me 70% of the time. That's okay. That's up to you. It depends on your stamina, your patience, your empathy, your context, your experience, your goals. How important is this person? Because yes, if a person is super important for a project or goal, maybe you're going to be more tolerant, more patient. With this project, if someone is annoying 50% of the time, sometimes even 60, but that 40 is super valuable, maybe I put up with it for a period and I understand, that person is going through a breakup. That person is going through a transition. But with the purpose of seeing growth. I'm a person who responds well to growth. I see growth, I'm more patient. I see no growth and no desire to grow, that's when I start giving up on people.
No, I think that's a very good way of putting it. And exactly, looking at what your goals are, looking at how they fit into those goals. You might also decide to put up with something for a certain period of time. For example, let's say you're in a very toxic relationship, but you rely on each other financially right now. Then for the period of time where you get independent financially, maybe you put up with that toxicity, but with a very clear plan that you remind yourself of that this is not forever. It'll be easier to go through a very difficult thing if you have at least some sense of a plan, some sense of a direction that you're going in. If you're in a really toxic relationship and you don't rely on each other financially, you don't work together, you don't have a lot of social circles that are combined, then it should be a very quick and easy split. If it's a relationship that's constantly draining you, that's a constant effort, where you're constantly the only one that's being responsible for that relationship dynamic. You look at, okay, what is the situation? How much is it draining me? How much effort am I putting into it? How much is the other person putting into it? What goals do we have long term? Do they go together? Do they go apart? Do we need each other, depend on each other for something right now where I can build a plan to not need them in the future? Because maybe you have an emotional or financial dependence, but if you're aware of it, you can make a plan to no longer be in that situation. If you're not aware of it, if you're not looking at it, then you keep falling back to them and falling back to them and falling back to them, and every attempt at getting out of the relationship doesn't last long and you end up back with them.
No, and in any, like if you talk about romantic relationship or business partnership, the idea is that together they should be greater than the sum of all parts. That's something that we want to look at. But yes, we also have to be patient and tolerant and understand that whenever you build a new team, whenever you build a new relationship, you're bridging gaps. You're healing wounds. You're healing traumas. And in the beginning, you're going to have more patience than once you've taken some time. And the sensation of progress can give you a lot of energy and stamina and resilience. And if you're not seeing progress, that's when things get annoying. There's nothing worse than feeling stuck. It's
Yeah.
feeling stuck in a relationship, feeling stuck in a business, and getting unstuck should be the priority. But yeah, there are so many things that we got to take into account. But like, for example, going back just to emphasize one little point, this question about, okay, so this issue, this example that was mentioned took 4 days to resolve. But something the way I look at it from a different perspective is those 4 days, yes, in the moment they were very, very frustrating, but in 5 years, it's not going to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to give too much importance. And if it makes a difference, it might actually be a positive difference, because those 4 days recollecting thoughts has gotten people a little bit more in tune with what's required, what are the common missions, what are the common goals, and it gave people time to reflect and analyze things. And I actually think those 4 days are going to be a catapult, because I've seen a difference in attitude, a difference in motivation, a difference in passion after that 4-day period. And seeing it as, you have a choice. I'm going to focus on those specific 4 days, or I'm going to focus on the long run. Oh, if I focus only on those 4 days, yeah, it was annoying. But if I focus, where do I want to be in 5 days? Oh, those 4 days of breathing and reflecting and analyze might have gotten people back on track, and might have gotten people not only back on track, but more motivated than ever, because they have evaluated what they did wrong without being pointed out. And actually, in this particular instance, what happened is the people involved that maybe didn't communicate and took a few days to kind of disconnect a little bit, they interestingly became more self-aware than I've ever seen them, and actually shared and took responsibility and really took ownership of the situation, and really focused on how to prevent that in the future and how to improve things in the future. And it was a situation where we didn't have to point fingers. We didn't have to blame anyone, because had we gotten in with blame game or pointing fingers, so this is you or this is wrong, they would have gotten more defensive. And instead of being 4 days, it would have been 4 weeks. Because I've seen people, when they get insecure and drained, disconnect for weeks at a time or months at a time. So 4 days was actually not that bad. It was just in the moment. It was stressful because it was in a very important period. And yes, I had to take my ego aside for a second and not make it about me. Or because in the moment I was like, yes, that's not acceptable. That's not okay. Do you even want to be here? This and that. I was like, I really wanted to go hard on them. But then it was like, I took my ego away from a second, and I focused on, what is the mission? What is the goal? The goal is this. We have these mutual goals. How do we get there? How do we resolve and prevent this? How do we learn from this? Every conflict is an opportunity for growth. And something I've seen in this business is, every time we have a difficult period with people having disagreements, every time we've had very difficult conversations, we have leveled up as a team. We have improved things. Productivity improves, solutions get found to annoying problems, and things get better. So we also got to look at that. Is it people disconnecting and not having conversations, and are things not getting better? If so, that's a problem. But if they come together and things get better, that's a good thing. So dealing with difficult people, dealing with difficult situations, it's something we have to do in any relationship, in any business, in any family. And having some level of tolerance and patience is key. And not burning bridges prematurely is key, because it's very easy to let our egos get in the way of, we should need to go through this, or that makes no sense, or I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to admit to that. Our egos get in the way of solving problems. And we got to be careful, and we got to disconnect our ego in the moment and be like, what is the common goal? What is the frustration? Why is this person feeling this way? Why does this person need time? How can I give them time? But also, how can we communicate? How can we solve things? And that is something that requires confidence. Confidence in the team or in the individuals. Confidence in people's individual abilities to process thoughts and such. And for example, me as a leader manager, during this kind of conflict that we experienced, I actually took a very passive approach. When the event happened, I really didn't make a big deal out of it. I kind of trusted people to take their breather and recollect their thoughts and get things back on track. And then when I felt that people were more regenerated and in a better state, that's when I decided, now it's time to have this difficult conversation and not just ignore it. Let's talk about it. Let's prevent this from happening again. Let's level up. And that requires a lot of tact. It requires emotional intelligence to know how to pick your battles, how to time your battles, and how to turn battles from battles to actually collaborative, communicative sessions, right? And yeah, it requires patience and it can be frustrating, but it is part of, with any important project, with any family, with any types of diversity, there are going to be those disagreements. There are going to be those difficult moments. And really, they can be a source of so much greatness. And I love having these difficult conversations. I love clashing with people in terms of, I love having disagreements because it enriches everyone's lives when people present alternate ways of doing things. And yes, we've all, what's that? Noted. Steve says noted. No, and I've said this in previous episodes. For example, Steve sometimes can be difficult to work with. It's no secret. He even admits it. But Steve has a mutual mission with us, mutual goals, and is very good at knowing how to improve things. Sometimes the way he communicates it is annoying. Many times we've had very strong, intense conversations about things and we want to kill each other, but because we have that common goal and we have a lot of mutual respect, despite how the intensity can be perceived, we have solved and improved so many things. And yes, there's still a long way to go. We're entrepreneurs. We have ambitious goals, and we're just starting in many ways. But it's impressive how many great things have come out of those difficult conversations. And yes, many of those difficult conversations, while they exist for a certain period, all of a sudden things get improved to a degree, such a level that that same narrative stops because the problem gets solved. And then, yes, something else comes up, and it might take a few weeks of intense communication and different ideas. But ego is something that we gotta take aside the ego, and we gotta put those missions in front of us and be like, what are we working towards, and how can we make this work for everyone? And we have to be willing to do that. And something that in the beginning in the office was a problem was people were like, I just invested this much time into this project, we're not using it. It was like, no, that was a prototype, it's not working. And people's egos were attached to the work, and I was like, no, it's not ready for prime time. No, I'm getting these complaints that it's not working in this sense. It's flawed, we got to make an improvement. And yes, when we let our egos get in the way, we might not be willing to look at how to improve things. And we might be like, but why didn't I know this earlier? Because we didn't have the information earlier. So we have to also understand that when we have many moving parts, when we have many different people involved in any dynamic, family, business, whatever, understand that there are going to be surprises, there are going to be frustrations, and the problem should always be focus on solve the problem, improve things, instead of winning the argument. If you focus on winning the argument or forcing your context, everyone loses. And that's sadly how many people are taught to deal with problems.
Yeah.
Stand up for yourself. If like how many people have kind of been raised with the idea of like, if someone does something mean to you, you gotta push back, you gotta hit back. Like, I'm not a fan of either extreme, not the okay, turn the other cheek, nor the okay, destroy the other person. I'm more of the understand what's going on. Why is this person acting this way? Why are they being this immature? Why are they being so stupid? Oh, it's because they're being bullied, or it's because they're being insecure, or it's because they're afraid. Okay, now I understand. Okay, let's fix the problem.
Yeah.
Like, what's the source of the problem? Not react to the situation.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's very easy to react emotionally. It's very easy to react with ego. It's very easy to react with pride and arrogance. But in most cases, people are in life, they're just insecure. They're a bit lost. They feel unheard. They feel unvalued. And if you make them feel valued, you make them feel heard, you can turn the most annoying person into the friendliest person. I remember one job I had. There was this girl that, I'm going to say a not so kind word, but she was literally a bitch to everyone. She was unbearable. She went to work with such a like me against the world mentality that it was impossible to be in the same room with her. And I remember one day I did a generous gesture. I think I don't know if I offered to repair her computer or her phone, or just kind of I took time to be like, I see you have this frustration. Do you mind if I help you out? And the way I did it and the way she received it was like, she felt like this is the first time someone actually takes time to ask what I need and offer help without expecting anything in return. And I helped her. And then all of a sudden after that, she became the friendliest person ever. Her whole demeanor changed. Not just to me, but to everyone. When she started feeling a bit supported, a bit cared for, the whole demeanor changed. And looking back, it's like, all the headaches and how we all feared her and how we all really couldn't stand her. And now all of a sudden, just one little act of kindness went a long way, and that was just always was needed. I'm not saying it's always that easy.
No.
It's not. It's not at all the standard. But I have seen that multiple times where someone, it's very intense, and I've disarmed them with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
I've disarmed them with generosity. And that's something that if you can put your ego aside and do that, that can heal a lot of stuff. That can solve a lot of problems. And I remember very clearly when I was younger, I was bullied a lot. And even I got into a point where I was kind of bullying one kid. It was a very good friend of mine. But he was smaller than me. And I felt so little. I felt so lost. And I was being bullied so much. And I bought a punching bag because I was so upset with the world. I was afraid of going to school. I was like researching martial arts stuff. And I was not athletic, so it was terrible. But I was so afraid of going to school. And I remember one day, I was kind of mean to this other kid. And he turned around and he told me, "What happened? This is not you." And in that moment, I changed. I was like, "Wait a minute, that's right. This is not me. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let's get back on track. I apologize. I'm sorry, that wasn't me." But, like, I know that me being a very strong pacifist, both from my personality, my brain chemistry, my context, my upbringing, I was really raised in a very pacifistic way. When I felt most insecure, when I felt most lost, I would even put people down.
Mm-hmm.
I also remember when I moved to Canada, every time I moved to a new country, I would get bullied, I would get treated differently. In Canada, actually, I got treated very well, but I had all these traumas from the past. From when I moved to Denmark, when I moved to Japan, when I moved to different places, to new schools, that I assumed I was going to get bullied. So every kind gesture that people did to me, I was waiting, when are they going to bully me? When are they going to laugh at my face? When are they going to leave me somewhere? I remember one of the first days in Canada, I was invited to Dairy Queen, to some fast food. And I was in the car. I was looking very aggressive and very upset because I really thought they were going to take me there and drop me off and laugh and drive away. That's how I felt inside. So I was very rude to them. And then later they were like, "That day you were so upset." And I wasn't upset with them. I was just afraid. I was afraid of what they would do to me. And being someone by nature, who by nature is very empathetic, is very generous, is very pacifistic, I know when I felt insecure, I've done those things. I remember one time we had a LAN party. For those of you who don't know what LAN parties are, is you basically bring a bunch of friends together, they bring their computers, they connect them all locally in the home, and they're playing video games against each other, or with each other, depending on the game. But basically, and I remember I felt so insecure that I would have to insist that my computer was better than other people. And I would put other people's computers down just to kind of make me feel better about myself. And that's why Steve's like, "That's why you did that with my quad-core AMD." No, well, that's more of a best friend rivalry. Steve and I have always had like this kind of rivalry with technology, and it's fun. But no, it was with other people that I if I felt threatened by them, I would kind of put them down, and it goes all against everything I stand for, all my strongest instincts. And I know that even with me, when I felt very insecure, when I felt very small, I've fallen into those type of situations. So I know if someone is doing that to me, it's because they're feeling small. It's because they're feeling like they're unheard, they're feeling unvalued. And if I focus on me versus you, no one wins. But if I focus on this is the common goal, these are the insecurities that are influencing you right now, let me work on making you feeling like have a more confidence and feeling less devalued and less discouraged. Okay, now let's get to the task at hand. And if you stop seeing people as bad people, like I challenge you, try to see the good in everyone. Try to see that little scared child in everyone. Even the most violent, the most discriminatory, the most rude people. I challenge you not to justify their actions, not to validate their actions, because judge actions, don't judge people without understanding the context. Because I think you'll be surprised about how many of those people who you blanket slate have said that person is totally bad, how many of those actually might be really, really kind to maybe other people, maybe not to you? Maybe they do a lot of generous things behind the scenes that you don't see. Maybe they don't do any of those kind of things, but maybe inside they want to, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Maybe they just don't understand the changes that are happening in society or the changes that are happening in the business, and they're holding on to the past because they're afraid of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a fear that they have. I mean, that happens a lot in the office when we're about to change something new. Sometimes there's a fear of the unknown. I'm afraid I don't think that's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that the person is rude or bad for shutting down the idea. It's just they're afraid of the unknown. How can we alleviate some of those fears?
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but I think most difficult, rude, judgmental, critical people are just afraid.
Yeah.
Are afraid, they're insecure. Yes, they can be burned out and have no patience and tolerance, but still the fear's amplified big time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the root of most discrimination and judgment and criticism is fear.
Yeah.
There are many types of fears that influence those things, and you eliminate those fears. You eliminate those insecurities. You uplift people, and things, they get better.
Mm-hmm.
They really do. And when you stop fighting against people and stop being you against the world, or also if you have someone who is them against the world, if you make them feel like they're not alone in the world, what a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I've met a lot of people who come to me with like, it's me against the world mentality, and I show them, no, you're not against the world.
Mm-hmm.
The world doesn't understand you, but are you giving them a chance to really understand you?
Mm-hmm.
Are you forcing your context? And it's impressive how people can change from being difficult to being collaborative. I've seen it so many times. But yes, sometimes you got to draw a line. I've done it with family members. I've done it with friends. There are some people who just are toxic because they're not ready to grow. They're not ready to collaborate. They're not willing to give more power to their goals and their insecurities and fears. They are living their life by fear. You cannot change people. You can invite them, you can stimulate them, you can encourage them, you can support them to be happier, more confident, more collaborative, to trust again, because many times people are not willing to take the time to share their context because they don't think anyone is going to listen because they've gotten disillusioned.
Mm-hmm.
So they're afraid of trusting again.
Yeah.
I've seen that many times in relationships when I've dated girls who come from an abusive relationship. In the beginning, there might be a fear of trust. Or a fear of being happy, or a fear of these things happen. So how can we eliminate people's fears or diminish the fears or make goals more important than the fears?
Mm-hmm.
If you can get someone so excited about a project, they themselves will suddenly give more focus on the project than their fears. And little by little, you can work on the fears.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different orders and different situations for different... I mean, every situation is different, but definitely, I think that's something that I would emphasize because I see it every day. I see it every day how people give so much power to their fears and reject themselves or give up on people prematurely. So, yeah. Anything you want to add? Anything you want to... Okay, I think it's a good moment to wrap up because... I think we've discussed a lot of different things related to dealing with difficult people, but all with the purpose of coming together, connecting with people, understanding the people, supporting each other, and getting to those common goals. And yes, filtering out those people who may not be in line with our goals and might not be in line with what we are trying to do. Yeah. And that's okay too. Don't be afraid of cutting out people that don't have the same goals as you, don't have the curiosity to understand. There's some family members that I love, but I cannot see too much because they always criticize me. They always say I'm not enough, that I'm doing this wrong, and they don't take the time to understand my context, and they don't have the same goals and missions. So it's like, okay, I'll see you a few times a year, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. They will tell you that there's something wrong with that, but you have to decide, is this working for me or not? But just don't give up on people prematurely. And I haven't given up on any of those family members completely. I just know timing. I know this is not the time. Maybe another time there's an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But don't force things. Don't force things. Don't force things. Don't force things. So that basically wraps up today's episode. And something that we're toying around with, we might be changing the dates and times. I don't know if we're going to be doing it for next week. If we do, make sure to be subscribed to our YouTube channel or to a member of our Facebook group. We will be putting little posts about any changes that might happen. We're trying to find a better time because both in the English and the Spanish podcast, we have gotten a lot of feedback that it's hard to watch it live while people are at work and maybe doing it in the evenings or at a different time. More people can participate live. So we're kind of analyzing what options we have. If you have any suggestions, any requests, we are more than willing to take those into consideration. Basically, what we want to do is make it easier to watch this live, so you can ask questions, so you can participate. And yeah, so see you next time. Hopefully, same time, same place, but be open to the fact that it might be a different time.
Yes.
And yeah, have a good one.